Hello? 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 Oh. Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for your patience. It's a very hot day, packed room, but I think it's a room that's full of energy. And we're really excited to welcome everyone to our event on what does COP28 need to deliver a food systems call to action. We were quite worried about the time of this event originally because it followed so quickly the Emirates Leaders Declaration on food. But I think that it means that we're here full of energy and passion. And we're here to talk today about what we can expect over the next 2 weeks, why it's important, and how we can drive this agenda forward together. My name's Katie McCoshen, and I'm part of the Food and Land Use Coalition, here together with many different organisations making up the Food Systems Partnership. And that's what we're all about, is collective action, science-based targets, and really driving this change forward together. So it's my pleasure to kind of kick off this event by handing over to Maximo Torero of FAO to talk us through the state of food systems, where we are in the world, and kind of why we need to change this agenda.
Thank you so much. So I will do a brief presentation. If they can upload it, it will be fast. All are bad news, so, but there is some hope. Okay, this doesn't work. This works? Okay, sorry. Okay, so the first thing is prices, which is what we hear a lot in the media and where everybody gets worried. So this is the historical evolution on real-time prices over time. As you can see, the crisis we had here, which people call crisis, but formally speaking, it was not a crisis. What we see here is that there was significant spikes, similar to what happened in 2018, 2007, 2008. But mostly it was more linked to a significant increase in prices of fertilizers. And also the blue line is grains because of what happened in COVID-19 and the recovery, and was exacerbated by the war in Ukraine because Ukraine and Russian Federation was a key exporter in that sense. But what the graph also shows is that this is nothing new. It has been happening in the past. And if I go back to the 70s, you will see more of these shocks. So it gives us a photograph that there is something more structural behind that we need to look carefully and we need to start changing. This is another graph because what I presented here on cereals are commodity prices, the FAO Food Price Index, for example, which is commodity prices. But here we look at the food inflation. And the food inflation is not the core grain that we exchange in the futures market. It's what we eat from the supermarkets and from the shops, rural markets. And if you look at the food inflation in nominal terms, you see that we had significant problems still now. The reds are very high, the purples are even higher. But look at Africa, for example. Look at South America, no? Surprisingly. Even if we correct in real terms, so that means that we remove the problem of exchange rate or the increase of other prices, still we see significant problems in many countries, although less, of course, because a lot of it is because of other commodity inflations and relative to other prices that were increasing. But the situation is that despite we observe a decline, this decline in the blue line and in the red line, this decline not necessarily move at the same velocity on the final commodity prices. So the two photographs are telling me two things. First, cereals and what we produce in fertilizers are a highly concentrated market, very few exporters in the world. Anything that happens to any of those countries automatically will increase prices. And at the end of the consumer side, when we add all the other commodities, it's telling me that those raw commodities have other inputs to create the final product that we eat that is more resistant to decline despite the raw commodities are going down. So there is a stickiness to reduce or to absorb the decrease. When the prices increase, they move fast up. When they decrease, they move very slowly down, and that's what creates food inflation. So another problem that we need to look carefully, which could be also on the structure of the market of the final consumers. The consequence of this is the food import bill. And what we have been observing is that the food import bill has been increasing substantially in the last years. There was a huge peak in 2022, and it's also increasing in 2023 despite the raw commodities are going down. Now, this is very, very complicated because if you look at the colors, which are the levels of incomes of countries, the gray, which is lower middle income, and the low income countries basically remain low and the same, which means that they are importing less and lower quality. which is very dangerous. While the developed countries, the high-income countries, the dark blue, they are covering the cost because they have income to do it. So the consequence is that food imports in countries which are import-dependent, the poorest countries, are being declining in terms of quantity and in quality. And that will create a significant consequence in the future. And with the level of debt stress that we have today, that will be even get worse. Now you will ask why the food import bill goes up? Because we import final food. Okay, and that final food is the graph of the maps that I showed you before. So it is still going up because other commodities, oil, transportation costs have not gone down at the velocity that we have liked. Now, if we look at evolution, which is the result of this, of undernourishment, we see that undernourishment was in 612, but then it went up to 738 in the middle point in 2021, and then it stabilized in 2022 in 735 million people chronically undernourished. So we are very far to recover pre-COVID levels. But if we project that number to 2030, we will be around 600 million people. So no way we will achieve SDG 2. Now, if we take out the effect of the war in Ukraine, the yellow line, and the effect of COVID-19, we will have 119 million people less chronically undernourished. So the situation will have been an improvement. Now, any of you expected COVID-19? No? Any of you expected a war in Europe in these years? Very difficult to think about. So those were two very uncertain events, okay? Which the hope here is that now that we don't have those, we have others, but not of key exporting countries, it could be that we will be able to recover, but that won't be enough. Still, we won't be at the velocity we need to achieve SDG 2. And that's what we need to change. Now, if we look at the concept of short-term food insecurity, which is acute food insecurity, it's a different concept to chronic undernourishment. Acute food insecurity is basically when in a short period of time if you don't have access to food, to put it in simple words. This is what WFP, what FAO reports in emergency situations. And here we see also a significant deterioration because of more conflicts and more countries which are becoming part of this list of what we call the hotspots. The number that we have is 255 million people in acute food insecurity in 2022, and the additional countries that WFP covers with CARI survey puts up into 333 million people chronic acute food insecure. So the situation, because of conflicts, have also deteriorated. So conflicts, climate, and slowdowns, especially for COVID-19, are three key drivers, in addition to this complex market structure, that make us very vulnerable to this problem of shocks in any of the countries. Because if you want to diversify your portfolio of food, you will basically have more countries, big exporters in the world. So if a shock of climate affects one of those, doesn't affect the rest, and therefore we are okay. But our portfolio is very concentrated, 5 countries. Okay, not only in the output side, but also in the input side. And that's why we had the problem of fertilizers. Now, if you add to that we have violated 6 of the 9 planetary boundaries today, 6. That means that we move into a different world, no? We move in a world where things could become exponential. And the frequency of these climatic shocks could increase. And our models don't have that capacity yet to identify what will happen in this dark scenario where we keep violating these planetary boundaries. And that's the concern, because the frequency of these shocks that we saw in the first price map will increase in numbers enormously. Today we are talking of $3 trillion, like around 168 billion of losses by shocks. But this is something that we need to be very careful and keep in mind. And in addition, we know that the agri-food systems affects climate because of emissions, biodiversity, water, and pollution. And that's why the work we are doing in the roadmap to SDG 2 and 1.5 is trying to say that we need to achieve SDG 2 because that's the right to food. We want people to have food. But we also need to make the world understand that the agri-food system has an enormous potential to improve. And that's why we are talking of just transition. We can increase efficiency so that we reduce these problems, and we also can rebalance through policies so that we use our resources better and improve distribution in the world. Those are 2 key concepts that we are bringing in this. And for that, we are measuring what are the externalities, because we need to know what externalities are. And we look at externalities in environment, which are the green, externalities in terms of socioeconomic, and externalities in terms of access to healthy diets. And in those concepts, we measure and we identify that today, the system, with certainty of 95%, is creating externalities of $10.8 trillion. And that's where the transformation has to come up. And this roadmap will set up a set of actions in 10 domains that will help us to achieve this and to reduce those externalities without necessarily increasing the prices. In some commodities and in some parts of the world, prices will have to increase. But in other parts of the world, prices should decline so that we can achieve access to healthy diets. And this is just by region of the world. So again, I stop here, but there is a lot of work that we are trying to do to create this change, and it's not something that we do in one spot. It's something that we have been building up of evidence. We just need to bring it together, and that's what the roadmap is trying to do, which will be launched on the 10th. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maximo. We look forward to kind of hearing more about the roadmap and kind of what it entails on the 10th. It's my pleasure to invite Patty Fong from the Global Alliance to the Future of Food to talk us through why food systems and fossil fuels are intricately linked and why that's something we need to increasingly pay attention to, especially in the context of today. Patty.
Thank you, Katie. So a couple hours ago, hour and a half ago, many of you were in the room when we heard about the Emirates, the COP28 presidency announced the Emirates Leaders Declaration on Sustainable Agriculture, Resilient Food Systems and Climate Action. For the first time, heads of states from 134 countries acknowledged that climate change is impacting our ability to grow, harvest, and produce food in the face of growing hunger, malnutrition, and economic stresses. You just heard from Maximo on all the costs that this has resulted in. More than 3 billion people can't afford a healthy diet. And you saw that number of $12 trillion, up to $12 trillion in those costs, of which much of that is coming from unhealthy diets. So we welcome this commitment from these 134 countries to integrate food and agriculture into their national climate plans by 2025, by COP30. This is a big step, one that we have, alongside many of you, been advocating for the last 2 years. And I think it's pretty amazing that within a span of 2 years, we've gotten to this point. For many other issues, it has taken much longer to get there. This is a big step, but, and most countries, we found from our analysis in the last year that actually haven't done very much so far. Nearly 3/4 of countries have not sufficiently integrated food and agriculture into their climate plans. So it's overdue, but it's not enough. The declaration fails to significantly emphasize the contribution of food systems, especially extractive industrial food systems, to greenhouse gas emissions. So we heard from Maximo, a third of food systems accounts for a third of greenhouse gas emissions. And it's not only in the form of methane and nitrous oxides, it's also in energy use in its worst form, fossil fuels. Our latest analysis found that food systems accounts for at least, and this is a really conservative number, at least 15% of fossil fuels burned annually. This is equivalent to the emissions from the EU countries and Russia combined. So even if all countries achieved their 2030 climate pledges, the fossil fuel used in our food systems would still blow our 1.5-degree budget by 2037. And this is because today's industrial food systems are increasingly fossil fuel intensive. Fossil fuels go into everything from manufacturing of synthetic fertilizers and pesticides to the plastics that are used in everything from the coatings of those pesticides and fertilizers to most food packaging. In fact, most packaging that is used to store ultra-processed foods, from meat and dairy to sweets and sugary drinks, all of which require highly energy-intensive manufacturing and petrochemicals in the form of plastics. The fossil fuel industry is investing heavily in the petrochemical sector to make plastics, pesticides, and fertilizers, and to lock in our dependence of our food systems on high carbon energy. In fact, food-related plastics and synthetic fertilizers accounts for about 40% of all petrochemical products. And the International Energy Agency predicts that petrochemicals will drive nearly half the growth of oil demand by 2050, outstripping the aviation and shipping sectors. So here we are, sitting here today in United Arab Emirates, a major oil-producing country, doing deals on the side on oil and gas. We've all seen the BBC headline, right? While hosting COP28. They are placing a lot of emphasis on renewable energy, on sustainable agriculture and food production, which is welcome, but it must not be used as a way to distract from the need to phase out of fossil fuels. We cannot transform food systems sustainably without addressing fossil fuel consumption. and we will not be able to phase out of fossil fuel and stop the catastrophic climate change without transforming our food systems. So how do we get started? By breaking out of our silos and fostering collaboration with those supporting a clean energy transition and those working towards transforming our food systems. We've identified 5 high-impact opportunities. First, phasing out of fossil fuel-based agrochemicals and transitioning to agroecological regenerative food production. This is not just about decarbonizing fertilizers and pesticides. It's actually about changing wholesale production practices. We need to review our subsidies and policies that are promoting bioenergy and biogas production. We need to shift to renewable energy for cooling, heating, drying, and processing foods. We need to support food environments that offer plant-rich diets and minimally processed foods. And we need to track and address corporate consolidation that's happening not only in the food industry, but also in the fossil fuel and chemical and agrochemical industries. So towards this end, earlier today, a group of 24 leading philanthropies jointly called for a 10-fold increase in investments for regenerative and agroecological transitions. Together, these foundations urge that we need to align our food systems towards 1.5 degrees in the Paris Agreement and phase out of fossil fuels, especially fossil fuel-based agrochemicals and in industrial agriculture. Over the coming months, we'll be supporting these foundations to co-design implementation plans with landscape advisors in the priority regions where they're already working. And our goal is to catalyze a transition to 50% regenerative and agroecological systems by 2040 and ensure that all agriculture and food systems are transitioning by 2050. We're also proud to sign on to the Climate Champions non-state actors call to action alongside 138 other entities representing farmers, fishers, businesses, cities, civil society, and consumer groups. And so back to the Leaders' Declaration. It's a good start, but it should have addressed more strongly the mitigation as well as adaptation potential with targets, timetable, and funding to make the commitments actionable. Acknowledgement of the issue is not enough. We need government action. On December 10th, we'll be launching a toolkit to support governments in how to integrate food systems into their NDCs that was developed in partnership with WWF, FAO, NDC Partnership, the Alliance for Biodiversity International and CIAT, the COP28 presidency, and Climate Focus. And this will be a toolkit as a practical resource for governments to support their transition. Let's work together to ensure actionable plans for the next round of NDCs. Thank you.
Thanks, Patty. And on that tone of action, it's my pleasure to invite our panelists to talk about action over the next 2 weeks, what we want everyone to be calling for, and how we're going to do it to the stage. Thank you.
Should I sit here? Yeah. I'll go first. Okay, great. Okay, thank you. Yeah, sure.
Is this one working? Yeah. Thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here representing the youth co-host of the Food Systems Pavilion, which is 13 organizations representing youth that came together to be meaningfully engaged, which means we are here moderating panels, but also taking decisions, asking for funds, pushing for things that we want. Yeah, when I think of climate change, I'm really terrified because it's a negative thing for me. I see slow change, I see many issues, sometimes I'm depressed, and I do like arts. That's why I want to moderate this panel with a bit of arts, a bit of dancing words, a bit of music. So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this electrifying panel discussion at the heartbeat of the COP negotiations. First, I will start with Gonzalo. Dirk Gonzalo is the initiator of the non-state actors' call to action about transforming our food systems for people, nature, and the planet. Do you feel that the non-state actors are turning up the volume in advocating for change at COPs? And what's new this year? Can you share with us what are the key asks and the beats that are driving the rhythm of this change?
Brilliant. Thanks so much. It's really exciting. Not the idea what you mentioned, the electrification of a room, packed room like this one, but to have a room as packed as this one, even people wanting to join means a lot. And not only means a lot in terms of this room, we all, I think, recognize that the first thing that COP28 has done for all of us and for humanity is putting food into the center of the agenda with an energy, with a momentum that we've never seen before. And that doesn't mean that have been like a lot of really fantastic efforts and a lot of contributions coming from previous COPs, from the UN Food Systems Summit, from, of course, the work that Maximo, of course, is representing from FAO and many organizations. But we have to recognize that this is a very unique momentum, probably well related to the amount of the crisis that we are confronting, not only when it comes to climate, also when it comes to, of course, food insecurity and hunger and malnutrition and everything else that we all recognize. So in that sense, I think that, yeah, the moment is perfect for what we refer to the activation of the ambition loop, right? And that means that we have heard from member states, more than 130 member states, signing the declaration, and I do agree that it might be not as ambitious as we would love in many aspects, but the number of countries understanding that this is a moment for food sets the condition for all non-state actors to do our work. And in that sense, I'm going to just refer rapidly to what are we mentioning when it comes to the call to action. It's about, as you can imagine, of course, support frontline food systems, the actors to adapt and build resilience to climate change, align food systems with the 1.5 degrees, address hunger and insurance for vulnerable individuals, change the food environment to improve availability, accessibility, and affordability, support a transition to a scaling up of sustainable approaches to food production in all aspects, enhance water resilience, water quality and availability, improve soil health through increase in investments, also protect, conserve, and restore nature and biodiversity, intensify efforts to have food and loss waste being removed from the value chain, and finally, reorient, align the risk and scale up finance, including multilateral and private, philanthropic, and blended finance. That's in general. What we expect now is to deliver the metrics. Right now we have to take that and create the concrete metrics to show that at COP29 and create an arc towards COP30 when we have to see this agenda embedded into the NDCs.
Thank you, Gonzalo. And let me tell you, the drumbeat roll is louder than ever with this call to action, and many thanks to you for initiating it. Now I would move to our Sustainable Development Specialist, which is Cecil. Let's take our audience on an artistic journey and move their minds. Negotiations are like a dance, and food systems play a pivotal role. We have seen recently that many people have been dancing to the moves of the food systems in the global stocktake. Can you tell us briefly what is the GST and what are the expectations for it?
Thank you so much. No dancing from me, no singing, but thank you for trying to make this more interesting. The global stocktake is the first time, according to the Paris Agreement, that we're looking at how the world is doing as a whole. And I think most of us knew broadly what it would look like as this technical analysis was finished. Yes, a lot of things are changing, but it's not enough and more needs to happen. And I think we will have to see how in the negotiations and the discussions among the state parties, what they will come out with this week and next. But I think it's quite clear that it's really time to get more serious. In that sense, having 134 countries sign up to this, thanks to the COP presidency, and to say we are publicly acknowledging that food is a serious part and we need to take food systems and action on food systems seriously, that's good. But part of the reason of why this is so welcome is because they haven't done this so far. And the truth is, we're 8 years into the Paris Agreement. What took them so long? We really need to see a step change, and that step change, I think, needs to, while it's true that it means also that for the next NDCs we will see more focus on food systems, there's no need to wait for the next NDCs. All countries can immediately, as of next week, as of January, go into their national documents, into their action plans, into their implementation frameworks, whatever they have, and can start writing food into that. If they haven't done this yet, don't wait for the next NDC deadline. Do it now. And that also means to get much more practical. What projects are the ones? It requires a lot of meetings to convene inclusive processes, as many countries have in place, as FAO and other partners already supporting. But to really get more serious about what this practically means and how putting a serious focus on food systems, both on the mitigation and the adaptation side, what that means in practice. For many countries, especially developing countries, it means also spelling out what it will cost to adapt and to have these costs ready and to submit them, to also put much more pressure on the financing side, because there will be need for much more international financing. So again, in sum, I would say, hopefully this GST will put a lot of pressure on this notion of getting serious. We need action at all levels, but many of us come to COP not because of COP action, but because what happens at COP can trigger in countries. So how can we carry this momentum into countries and hopefully see much more practical action focus, planning, including spatial planning, bringing together people across sectors that have to do with food systems, with land use, and to really see how the practical aspects can be hammered out. Every country is different, and in every country this process will look different. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Cecil. You see, 8 years after the Paris Agreement, I see a party of COPs. We are at the night 28, and everyone is still joining to do the same dance. Clément, with more than 8 years of experience in international processes and educating youth and civil society, don't you think that the negotiations can sometimes feel like a complex dance floor with thorny issues? If you can tell us the vibe, how to understand the different perspectives and support them on this dance floor.
Thank you, and thank you very much for having me here. So I think we've been hearing on different pieces of the food puzzle at COP28. Obviously the global stocktake, what non-state actors are doing, what governments obviously are putting forward at the leaders level. But there's another piece to that puzzle, which is really the negotiations, the formal process on agriculture and food security. What happened last year at COP27 is the establishment of what's called the joint work on agriculture and food security. And I feel we are very lucky in the food community to have a dedicated work stream in the negotiations that really focused on that topic of agriculture and food security. But yeah, obviously, on the dance floor, I guess things are a bit hectic sometimes. There's a lot of movement. And I think the next 2 weeks are very important because governments are supposed to adopt a roadmap for the next 3 years. And I can give you a little bit of information on what's supposed to be in that roadmap for the next 3 years. So you're going to have an online portal. You're going to have some workshops. And you're also going to have some annual reports. And all those different pieces are very important, obviously, for the negotiations to progress. And one thing I also wanted to mention is that, obviously, as part of the push for a food systems approach to be integrated at COP28, there are also growing calls for food systems to be reflected as part of the workshops that are going to be organized in the next 3 years. So I think that's something to watch. And maybe another issue to watch, and this is what keeps a lot of governments busy, is actually how they're going to work together, how they're going to coordinate with each other to really push action on the ground at the national level. And that is obviously a very complex task, but also a very important one because it touches on issues like funding, like national implementation. And I feel that's definitely going to be quite an exciting dance to watch in the coming days.
Thank you for passing the vibe. Now to Erica. FAIR is setting the stage at COP28. But what's the grand performance, Erica? What's FAIR calling for, and what's the encore financial actors want to see from governments?
Yes, thank you for the question. And thank you for the very fun way of moderating. I was half expecting electronic beat music to accompany in the background, but yes, so on that question, so FAIR initiative, because we work with non-state actors. We work with investors. We represent institutional investors as our members. And what we call for is what investors are expecting governments to do more of, which is stronger actions, really, around amplifying the importance of tackling emissions related to agri-food sector. And this is, very highly anticipated, especially on the dedicated food day on December 10th. I think investors are aware that tackling the agri-food systems emission is a key aspect of really transitioning into what we want. We want our 1.5 degree goal to be in sight. And not only they are starting to be aware of the risk, the impact that the industrial food system is having on the environment. These are the factors that Maximo had pointed out earlier. But they are also now recognizing that the climate change and nature risks are impacting them as well. So these are the financial material risks. So for instance, the climate change, heat stress are impacting crop yield and cattle mortality. Deforestation, for instance, is now not just an environmental risk, but it's also a financial, it's a regulatory risk because of the EUDR. And so markets that are exporting to EU are now having to do due diligence to make sure that their supply chain is deforestation free. And investors want to be guided, right, with a roadmap, because once they have a roadmap that outlines the targets, they can align their portfolios to meet the targets and milestones, and also they can align based on the actions recommended by the roadmap, where to align the financial flow to make the change faster based on the actions that needs to be prioritized. So the call really is for the COP presidency to continue amplifying really the importance of tackling emission in the agri-food sector.
Thank you, Erica. I want to go back to you, Clément, from dancing to singing. I think there are lyrics of this popular song called Sharm el-Sheikh Joint Work that we don't really understand. If you can please explain to us what do we mean by governance and better implementation?
Yeah, I think that's very much what I was mentioning at the end of my intervention earlier, which is all about the manner by which governments are going to work together and coordinate with each other to drive forward those negotiations on agriculture and food security. And I think what's very important is that they focus on obviously some key roles and key functions for that sort of coordination or governance or that complicated dance, as you put it. And obviously, I think the first one is very much how those negotiations on agriculture and food security coordinate or interact with other parts of this climate convention, and how they also coordinate and work with other institutions, other agencies, other stakeholders outside of the climate negotiations, outside of the UNFCCC. And for example, how they engage with the global stocktake process that we were talking about yesterday. Because, yeah, food systems are not relevant just in those negotiations on agriculture and food security. They are relevant in many other places. So I think that's one. Then, obviously, the second key role or function is very much related to the mobilization of resources and the mobilization of funding for the food system transformation we want. And I think there's also a role to play for those negotiations on agriculture and food security to give signals, to give recommendations or requests to, for example, channel more funding for smallholder farmers, to make sure that the money that is coming from the Green Climate Fund, from the Adaptation Fund, is also channeled for obviously the solutions that we want to see in the food system. And obviously, I also think that yeah, that's a very important topic to consider. Implementation at the national level, which is, I think, the third role and function I want to highlight, which is very much about the integration of food systems in national climate plans, like the NDCs, the national adaptation plans, and obviously those negotiations, they can also send some signals, some requests, some recommendations to make sure that moving forward, governments are going to integrate food system transformation in their climate plans, which obviously would strengthen the linkages between those two very critical issues that we have been discussing today. Thanks.
Thank you, Clément. I want to go back to you, dear Gonzalo. So I want to invite you all to sign the call to action Or
I thought that everyone had already signed.
did they not? How many numbers? How many signatures?
What a shame, I'm leaving this room.
Do you have a number in mind
That we will reach in terms of signatories, you mean?
that we read and maybe we will reach? What are
We
our
are now
hopes?
in 154, I believe, and we should be reaching at least 200 in the next 20 minutes, but
Yeah, I think
let
we
me
should.
count them. We would expect that definitely we will be reaching 200 at the end of the first week of COP, but then it's open for having more and more signatories to join, not only as a pledge, as a commitment, but also with concrete actions to be declared. So that's a very important part. I don't know, you were going to ask me something in particular, or wanted to talk about that?
Yeah,
Okay,
both.
cool.
I also want to invite everyone to our event on the 10th at Al Waha
Right.
Theater,
Right.
where we're going to launch the call to action. Gonzalo will be the moderator, and I will be a speaker
Right.
with Her Excellency Razan Al Mubarak.
Well, Razan already launched the call to action a few minutes ago,
Yeah.
so
But
we can relaunch
our-
it. The important is that we will collect signatories, right? Right, a really high number. So less than 200 don't even come. But again, the important thing is, as was said, like, and I totally agree with Cecile that this at the end must be reflected on countries enhancing their commitments with local regulation, and agree as well as Clemens that that's an important thing. And the work ahead, this is the start line, the work ahead towards COP29, towards next week, as you said, like, is to help those countries to understand that there's a lot of action happening in the ground, there's a lot of activity and momentum at the non-state actor level, and we need them to understand that, to see that, and to integrate that with regulation that will create this new level playing field where it will not only be achieving the climate goals, but also other the hunger and poverty and resilient goals that are totally integrated and much more in the center of the agenda. So we are really excited of this moment, but again, this is the starting line. Now we will have to see how much we can develop that with concrete metrics, with traceability of those commitments, with concrete action, and at the end, with the right type of regulation in every country in the world.
Thank you, Gonzalo. Erica, if you had to give us a 30 seconds poem, what would it be?
A 30-second what, sorry?
Poem.
A poem? No, please don't. I think as parting words, how about that? And again, I'm going to come back to the capital market, perhaps. I think how they can help accelerate change is really to make capital flow to areas that's needed. And therefore, I think the communication and engagement with policymakers, especially during discussions on climate change and sustainable food system, is really important. And I'm actually encouraged to see more and more investors in the space. So, thank you.
Thank you, Erica. Maybe, Cecily, you want to close the curtains?
Oh, that's not a speaking role, but no, I think, just to say, I think it's wonderful if it turns out that this COP really puts food systems at the center of the agenda. That's fantastic. Let's see how we all can work together to carry that energy over into countries. And that means all countries, including those that are holding money, including those that can, with very concrete decisions, change how the practical aspects and the practical work can go forward. We're in this kind of unhealthy space where countries don't put a lot of work into some of their plans because there's no money on the table, and there's no money on the table because there's no good plans. We have to quickly get out of this. If that declaration helps us to get quickly across that bridge, I think we're all good. Thank you so much. To you.
Thank you.
Curtains are closed.
Thank you. Thank you all for joining us. I hope we can keep this beautiful vibe, and I hand it to Katie.
Thanks so much, everyone. So we started off very existential with the state of the world. We've now heard about what we want to hear, and I'm going to invite Earthring Cousins and Ed Davey to do a 10-minute conversation on what we hope to happen over the coming 2 weeks and what we can expect to hear.
Great. Earthrin, if you go there, I'll go here. Thanks, everyone. It's been an incredible day. We've all dreamt about this moment, as others have said in their fantastic speeches. It's my privilege to interview Earthrin about what happens next. For those of you who don't know Earthrin, she used to run the World Food Programme. She's had a distinguished career in the US. and she's an ambassador of the Food and Land Use Coalition, which has been part of this pavilion. And Earthrin, you were there in the room when those 134 world leaders, about 90 minutes ago, signed the declaration. What do we do next?
Well, let me just first say how momentous it was for those 134 leaders. It took us 28 years to get on the center stage. And I'm older than probably my son is older than many of you in this room. But let me just say, that's important for you to realize the progress that we've made. We're not where we want to be, but we're a long way from where we were. And the reality is that at COP26, you will recall, we went to COP26 to stand on the tables because there was no food day, that we were part of Nature Day in COP26. And we said we needed a food day. And then the UNFCCC came out with numbers that said what the effect of the food system was on environment, and that we were not going to reach the Paris goals. And so for COP27, they gave us a food day. But it was still about food security and agriculture, and not food systems. So it didn't take in the work that we know is necessary to support where we need to get if we want to achieve the outcomes that we need from the food system. So what do we need to do over the next 10 days while you all are all here? We need to continue to let our voices be heard, not just to each other. That was part of the mistake we made at COP27. We talked to each other a lot, and we felt really good when we left COP27. And then when the document came out, and food security was there once, and agriculture was there twice, and the 50,000-word document, and food systems wasn't there, we said, how did that happen? And so a lot of really good work went into, and Folu and many of you who've spoken already should be quite proud that a lot of work went into getting that declaration completed and ensuring that there is language there that's not everything that we wanted, but gives us a start and a roadmap. And yes, we do need to ensure that we are having conversations with delegations. And the countries that you are from, we need to ensure that you are setting up bilateral meetings with those delegates to talk about the NDCs and the work that they need to do and how you can help, your organizations can help, FAO can help, FOLU can help. Because, okay, so yeah, we should go back to as soon as it's done, and they should start just putting the NDC, the food and agriculture related work into their NDCs as priorities. But I'm a pragmatist after being at this for a very long time. And I know that in most governments, part of the challenge with food systems is that you're not just talking about the agriculture ministry, you're also talking about the environmental ministry, the finance ministry, and depending upon the countries, it may even be the development ministries that are also part of all of this. And so who has the lead, who is responsible, all of that work needs to happen at country level. And we're also talking about countries that, if you looked at the chart that Maximo put up there, are still in significant financial challenge, most of those countries. And we're not just talking about LDCs. When you're talking about Kenya and Tanzania, both have dollar challenges and debt challenges. You know that while this is important, we need to get it prioritized. This was supposed to be a dialogue, and I'm just talking. That's because I listened to all of you all talk, and I got excited because the work is happening from people like you. But what we need to do is make sure that all of us are talking to those government officials who also have the responsibility for getting this done. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, don't be sorry, Earthrin. That was fantastic. I'm sure you'd all agree we could listen to Earthrin for hours. And I'll just ask you two more questions, colleagues, because we've got to close on the half hour. Is that right? The first one is the US. The US is one of the countries that signed. China signed, by the way, Brazil, EU, 134 countries and counting, 137. And by the way, it's open for the next 10 days. Let's get it to 190 by the end of this COP. For God's sake, everyone, come on, let's do it. But the US, what do you think Mr. Vilsack will do when he gets home next week?
Yeah, Here's reality. The U.S. is there with this administration, okay? And we need to keep this administration in order to ensure that we can keep moving forward. That's not being political, it's being realistic. And so he will tell you exactly what he is doing. He has a whiteboard. I hope you all get to hear him talk about this. And talking about that 85% of the farmers receive 15% of the subsidies, as it's written into the Farm Bill today. And so he has this entire strategy for both the Farm Bill work as well as new regulatory work that would provide additional economic opportunities for farmers to embrace new regenerative practices, because you change the economics of how they farm and their ability to embrace new practices. So that work, there's momentum around this. The IRA that many of the Europeans were quite upset about did include agriculture, and there was financing there to support what is necessary. So I don't want to put it all on the U.S. What is the EU going to do? They signed up for this as well, and many of their governments are not moving forward the action fast enough. But also, what do we do with Brazil and China? And I would even get, we're on camera, but I'll say, countries that haven't yet signed but are interested, but are concerned about their food security and their concerns about embracing the greenhouse gas reduction, how that may affect their domestic food security when they have domestic food security issues. That's legitimate. And as leaders in the non-state community, our responsibility is to help countries find answers to overcoming those legitimate questions regarding their food security and nutrition security, so that they can also prioritize emissions reduction as well. It shouldn't be anything.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Earthrin. We've got a few more minutes, so I'm just going to ask one more question, then I'm going to invite colleagues from the floor if they've got burning questions. The question I have, Earthrin, is you've been at this for quite some years, as you mentioned gently, despite and many of us have. And it feels like today is a very significant step forward. And yet we are in a world of crisis, as Maxim and others reminded us. How do we sustain this hopeful narrative and this optimistic implementation that Patty also called for in the countries? How do we make sure that really carries on through COP and then back into the next few years of hard work in countries?
Well, first of all, we must have the financing that's necessary to support the actions, particularly for those countries that are dependent upon the commitments that have been made, and those that are already facing impacts from the climate crisis that has already begun, in order to support their ability to continue to perform. Because if countries are falling further behind because they don't have access to financing, you cannot expect them to perform the work that is necessary on the emission side if they have challenges on the food security side. So the financing is going to be critical. Then we've got to get out of our silos, guys. If we want to carry this momentum forward, we need to bring consumers along with us. We need to bring voters along with us if we want to bring governments along with us. Because we represent loud but not majority voices in most of the countries in which we live and work. And so if we want the action needs to be outside. As tough as we are in here at COP28, we need to be just that vocal and hardworking outside in the communities that don't spend their days talking about the issues of food systems transformation. Because right now, consumers are not coming along with us, and voters aren't there. And that's what we need to change, because public will is truly necessary to ensure government action, no matter where you are on the globe.
Thank you so much, Earthrin. That's really wonderful. Let's follow Earthrin's lead there and really take this work forward together as a community with a much broader community outside the walls of this COP. Today is a fantastic day. We've got 10 days of events coming up thanks to the fantastic team who've been leading this pavilion. The roadmap is also very important coming on the 10th of December. The philanthropies have got announcements to make. Some of the companies here have got announcements to make on regenerative agriculture. There's the call to action from non-state actors. It's going to be a fantastic 10 days. Thank you, everybody, and I'm going to pass it to Katie to close. Thanks.
Thank you both. And I'm actually going to pass to Raphael Podswar from the Food for Climate Pavilion in the spirit of collaboration. Last year, these were 2 separate pavilions. This year, it's 1 shared space, and we hope we can continue that work going forward. And no pressure, but you are the last thing that stands between this room and hopefully, if the logistics go well, a drinks reception.
Thank you, Katie. And you already killed my first question. I was about to ask if I was like the only person separating you from the buffet, but I'll try to make it very short. I think we tackled on a lot of very, very important and interesting topics in the last hour. The fragility of food systems, for example, COVID-19 or the Russian aggression were not necessarily things that we had on the radar or that we thought would really happen and disturb food systems to this extent. We talked about inflation, the 800, of course, over 800 million people that do not have access to healthy and sufficient diets. So there is like many, many different topics that I thought were very interesting. Of course, the fossil fuel topic, which I think is also very important to tackle because, of course, it's kind of like the elephant in the room in this context of a COP here. But I think there is also hope in a sense, and there is like also something to take from this COP in Dubai. There is like really like this Emirates declaration with over 134 countries. We, I think, really have the potential to reach more countries in the coming days. The non-state actors declaration that also mentions like very important topics for us, for example, protein diversification in the north and a rebalancing of protein intakes between the north and the south, which is also one of the topics that we don't want to address sometimes in the north. We talked, of course, about like the role of investors, like public finance, the cost of adaptation. Clément mentioned the Sharm el-Sheikh Joint Work on Agriculture, which is a too long acronym to use, but like there is many things that we will be able to engage in the coming days. And in the spirit of collaboration between like the 2 pavilions, I really also encourage everyone to go out at the entrance in the negotiation zone, to not only stay in this zone, even though of course I'm rooting for the pavilions to have like like delegates coming in here, but we know also the reality of the 2 COPs kind of, and like the delegation versus pavilion zone. So I also like encourage you to invite people here, delegates, to invite them personally. There will WhatsApp, etc., to reach out to them like in this zone, and to make sure that we can also like really have an impact with that. And I really want to thank the Food Systems Pavilion for inviting me today, and we really like appreciated working together in the past year, and it's really a great project. And on a lighter note, I also think that one of the things we had been working on was to have like more plant-based options in the catering. I know many restaurants are closed like today and yesterday, so it was difficult and there was a lot of logistical trouble, but it's also a good sign to see that we're able to have like more diversified like options within the COP. So I wish you all a great COP, and please come also over to the Food for Climate Pavilion and come here in the coming days, and we'll see each other in the coming 10 days. Thank you so much.